What if everything you think you know about Jesus' psychology is completely wrong? For 2,000 years, historians have studied his words and actions, but they've missed three mind-bending patterns that reveal a psychological complexity no one talks about. These aren't religious interpretations. These are behavioral mysteries that challenge everything we assume about one of history's most influential figures. The truth about his mental strategies will change how you see leadership, influence, and human nature forever. Ready to have your mind blown? Because what you're about to discover will shatter every assumption you've ever had about how the human mind works at its highest level. Here's something that will mess with your head. Jesus performed miracles in front of crowds, then immediately told people not to talk about them. Think about that for a second. You heal someone's blindness, and your first instinct is to say, "Keep this quiet." Most leaders would be throwing a massive PR campaign, right? Yet Jesus consistently did the opposite. When he healed lepers, he said, "Tell no one." When he cast out demons, he commanded silence. When he raised people from the dead, he gave strict orders not to spread the word. This makes zero sense from a traditional leadership perspective. If you're trying to build a movement, why would you actively suppress your greatest achievements? Historians have tried to explain this away with religious theories, but they're missing the psychological genius behind this strategy. This wasn't random behavior. This was calculated psychological warfare that reveals a mind operating on levels most people can't even comprehend. The pattern appears over and over again throughout the Gospels. After healing a deaf man, Mark records that Jesus commanded them that they should tell no one. After curing a blind man, the same thing. Do not even go into the town. When Peter declared him the Messiah, Jesus sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone. This wasn't humility or accident. This was a deliberate psychological strategy that created something far more powerful than any marketing campaign could achieve. But here's where it gets really weird. The more he told people not to talk, the more they talked. Every single time he commanded silence, the opposite happened. Stories spread like wildfire. His reputation grew exponentially, and this wasn't despite his commands for secrecy, it was because of them. The question that's been haunting psychologists for decades is simple. Did he know this would happen? Was this level of reverse psychology intentional? But why? What was going on in his mind that made him consistently choose secrecy over publicity? The answer reveals an understanding of human psychology that was centuries ahead of its time, and it's about to blow your mind in ways you never expected. Here's the psychological bomb that changes everything. Jesus understood the power of scarcity and forbidden knowledge better than any modern marketer, politician, or influence expert who's ever lived. When you tell people not to talk about something amazing, you create an irresistible psychological pressure that's impossible to contain. It's called the forbidden fruit effect. The more you're told not to do something, the more desperately you want to do it. But Jesus didn't just understand this principle, he weaponized it with surgical precision. Think about what happened psychologically when he said, "Don't tell anyone." If he had said, "Go tell everyone about this miracle," people would have seen it as self-serving promotion, and their natural skepticism would have kicked in. Instead, by saying, "Don't tell anyone," he made people feel like they were sharing a secret, something exclusive and precious. This turned every person who witnessed a miracle into an involuntary evangelist who felt like they were breaking rules to share something incredible. The psychological research backs this up in ways that are absolutely mind-blowing. Studies show that when people are told not to share information, they actually share it more frequently and with more emotional intensity. Why? Because forbidden knowledge feels more valuable. When someone breaks a don't tell rule to share something with you, your brain interprets that information as incredibly important. Jesus was essentially turning every miracle into insider information that people couldn't wait to whisper to their friends. But there's an even deeper layer that reveals the true genius of this strategy. By commanding secrecy, Jesus was also protecting himself from the political consequences of his actions while still allowing the stories to spread organically. If questioned by authorities, he could honestly say he wasn't promoting himself. In fact, he was actively discouraging publicity. Yet the stories spread like wildfire anyway, creating a grassroots movement that seemed completely organic rather than orchestrated. This reveals a mind that understood influence at a level most people never reach in their entire lives. He grasped that the most powerful movements don't feel like movements, they feel like secrets being shared between friends. He had cracked the code of viral influence 2,000 years before the internet was even invented. Let me break this down with a simple analogy that will make this crystal clear and show you just how genius this strategy really was. Imagine you're at a party and someone whispers to you, "I'm not supposed to tell you this, but did you hear what happened with Sarah last week?" Your attention immediately locks in, right? Your heart rate probably even increases slightly. Now, compare that to someone announcing loudly, "Hey everyone, gather around while I tell you about Sarah." Which one makes you more curious? Which story are you more likely to remember and retell? Jesus operated like the ultimate party whisperer, but on a scale that changed human history. By saying, "Don't tell anyone," he turned every miracle into a whispered secret that people couldn't wait to share. But here's the genius part. When people shared these secrets, they weren't just retelling events. They were passing on something that felt forbidden and precious, which made the stories more emotionally charged, more memorable, and more likely to be retold with passion. Think of it like this. If Netflix announced a new show by saying, "Please, don't watch this," it would become the most watched show in history within days. People can't resist forbidden content. Jesus understood this psychological trigger and used it to create the most successful grassroots movement in human history, all while appearing humble and non-self-promoting. This wasn't just smart, this was psychological mastery that reveals a mind operating on multiple levels simultaneously. He was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, using reverse psychology principles that wouldn't be formally studied by psychologists until 1900 years later. The man had figured out viral marketing before marketing even existed. If this is exploding your head, hit that like button so more people can discover these hidden truths. But wait, because the second case is even more shocking. Here's the second psychological puzzle that will completely blow your mind. Jesus wielded more influence than emperors and kings, yet he systematically rejected every traditional symbol of power that has ever existed. Think about how absolutely insane this is. He had crowds of thousands following him, people willing to die for him, governments afraid of him, yet he chose to live like a homeless person. He could have built palaces, but slept under the stars. He could have worn royal robes but dressed like a peasant. He could have demanded armies but walked everywhere on foot. This goes against every principle of human psychology we understand about authority and influence. Modern research shows that people follow those who display status symbols, expensive clothes, impressive titles, luxurious possessions, displays of wealth and power. These things signal competence and success to our primitive brains. Yet Jesus did the exact opposite of everything psychology tells us about leadership, and somehow became more influential than anyone in human history. But it gets even weirder. This is where the psychological mystery deepens into something almost impossible to explain. When people tried to make him king by force after he fed 5,000 people, he literally ran away into the mountains. When offered worldly power by Satan in the desert, he turned it down without hesitation. When his disciples argued about who would be greatest in his kingdom, he told them the greatest would be the servant of all. He consistently rejected every opportunity for traditional power. This behavioral pattern is so unusual that it's almost unthinkable in today's world. Imagine a political candidate refusing campaign donations, rejecting endorsements from powerful people, and deliberately choosing to appear weak and poor. They'd lose immediately, right? Yet Jesus used this anti-power strategy to build the largest following in human history that's still growing 2,000 years later. The psychological mystery deepens when you realize this wasn't just spiritual theater or public performance. Historical records show he genuinely lived this way, even when no one was watching, even when it would have been easier to accept comfort and status. He wasn't performing humility for public approval. He was operating from a completely different understanding of how influence actually works. Here's the mind-bending truth that changes everything we think we know about power and influence. Jesus discovered that authentic power comes from voluntary vulnerability, not displays of strength. This is one of the most counterintuitive psychological principles ever demonstrated in human history, and modern research is only now beginning to understand why it works so effectively. When someone with obvious power chooses to be vulnerable, it creates what psychologists call earned authority. Influence that feels given rather than taken. Think about it. When a billionaire chooses to live simply, it doesn't make them seem weak. It makes them seem impossibly strong. When someone who could demand everything asks for nothing, people want to give them everything. It's a psychological phenomenon that seems to defy logic but works with incredible consistency. Jesus understood that displays of power create resistance, while displays of service create devotion. When people see traditional authority, their natural psychological response is to test it, challenge it, or rebel against it. It's hardwired into our brains from millions of years of evolution. But when they see someone powerful choosing powerlessness, their response is completely different. They don't want to resist. They want to protect and serve. They feel honored to be trusted with vulnerability. This explains why his influence grew stronger the more he rejected power. Every time he washed someone's feet instead of demanding they bow. Every time he ate with outcasts instead of dining with elites. Every time he chose service over dominance, he was demonstrating a form of strength that people had never seen before. It was so unusual, so unexpected, that it short-circuited people's normal psychological defenses. But here's the psychological bomb that makes this even more incredible. This only works when it's completely authentic. You cannot fake this kind of vulnerability for influence. People's psychological radar immediately detects manipulation and responds with disgust. The reason Jesus' anti-power strategy worked is because it was genuine. He wasn't performing humility to gain influence. He was genuinely more interested in serving than ruling. This reveals a mind that understood human psychology at such a deep level that he could flip our most basic assumptions about power and influence completely upside down, creating a form of leadership that felt so natural and attractive that people would follow him anywhere, even to their deaths. Picture this scenario and really imagine yourself in this situation. You're at a high school reunion, and there are two incredibly successful people there. The first person is wearing expensive clothes, driving a luxury car, and constantly talking about their achievements, their money, their status. The second person is dressed normally, asks about your life, listens to your stories, and when you eventually find out they're incredibly successful, they're almost embarrassed to talk about it. Which person do you respect more? Which one would you rather spend time with? Which one makes you feel better about yourself? Jesus was like that second person, but on a cosmic scale that's almost impossible to comprehend. He had the power to command armies, but chose to serve dinner to his friends. He could have lived in palaces, but chose to sleep outdoors with no permanent home. He could have worn crowns, but chose to wear a carpenter's clothes. This created a psychological phenomenon where people didn't just respect him, they were magnetically drawn to him in ways they couldn't even explain. It's like watching someone who could easily win an arm wrestling contest choose to help their opponent instead of competing. Your brain doesn't compute this as weakness. It computes it as incomprehensible strength. When someone clearly has power, but chooses not to use it for personal gain, it triggers a deep psychological response that's almost impossible to resist. This wasn't just revolutionary leadership, this was a complete rewiring of how influence works that's still confusing leadership experts today. He proved that the fastest way to gain everything is to want nothing, and the strongest way to lead is to serve. Modern leadership experts are still trying to understand and replicate this psychological principle that Jesus mastered 2,000 years ago without reading a single psychology textbook. Subscribe now, because the third case coming up will completely change your perspective on human nature. Here's the final and most complex psychological puzzle that will completely rewrite everything you think you know about emotional intelligence and human psychology. Jesus displayed a range of human emotions that seems impossible for someone of his supposed spiritual status. We're talking about documented moments of explosive anger, deep sadness, overwhelming joy, crushing anxiety, and raw frustration, emotions so intense and human that they've puzzled theologians and psychologists for centuries. Think about this contradiction that makes no logical sense. Someone who preached love and forgiveness once grabbed a whip and violently drove money changers out of the temple, overturning tables, scattering coins, and causing complete chaos. Someone who taught about eternal peace wept so intensely over Jerusalem that witnesses recorded his tears in detail. Someone who promised joy and hope experienced such anxiety in the Garden of Gethsemane that he literally sweat blood, a rare medical condition called hematidrosis that only occurs under extreme psychological stress. This emotional complexity doesn't fit our expectations of spiritual leaders at all. We expect them to be calm, controlled, consistently peaceful, above human emotions. Yet Jesus displayed what can only be described as the full spectrum of human emotion, often in ways that seem to contradict his own teachings. He told people to turn the other cheek, then made a whip to drive out corruption. He promised peace, then admitted he came to bring a sword. He taught about love, then called religious leaders snakes and whitewashed tombs. But here's what's truly mind-bending about this psychological pattern. These weren't emotional outbursts or character flaws or moments of weakness. These were strategic emotional displays that revealed a psychological sophistication that defies explanation. Each emotion appeared at precisely the right moment to achieve maximum impact, suggesting a level of emotional intelligence that operated on multiple dimensions simultaneously. The question isn't whether these emotions were real. Historical accounts from multiple sources confirm they were genuine and intense. The question that's been haunting psychologists is how someone could be so emotionally transparent while simultaneously being so emotionally strategic. How do you feel everything deeply while maintaining perfect awareness of how those feelings affect others? Here's the psychological breakthrough that connects everything and will change how you see human potential forever. Jesus had achieved what modern psychology calls integrated emotional authenticity, the ability to feel genuine emotions while simultaneously understanding their strategic impact. This isn't emotional manipulation or calculated performance. This is emotional mastery at a level that seems almost superhuman. When he wept over Jerusalem, he was genuinely heartbroken about the city's future destruction. But he also understood that public displays of grief from leaders create powerful emotional bonds with followers and demonstrate authentic care. When he exploded in anger at the temple, he was genuinely outraged by corruption and injustice, but he also knew that strategic displays of righteous anger can catalyze movements, clarify moral boundaries, and show that some things are worth fighting for. This explains the psychological pattern we've seen throughout all three cases and why this final revelation ties everything together. His strategic silence wasn't cold calculation, it was authentic humility that happened to be psychologically Brilliant. His rejection of power wasn't performance, it was genuine service that happened to create unprecedented influence. His emotional transparency wasn't weakness, it was authentic feeling that happened to demonstrate perfect emotional intelligence. What makes this so extraordinary is that most people can either be authentic or strategic, but not both simultaneously. When we try to be strategic with our emotions, we become manipulative, and people sense it immediately. When we're purely authentic without awareness, we often lack the consciousness to maximize positive impact. Jesus somehow managed to be completely genuine while being perfectly strategic, suggesting a level of psychological integration that borders on the impossible. But here's the final piece that ties everything together and reveals the true depth of this psychological mystery. All three of these patterns point to someone who understood that the highest form of influence comes from complete authenticity, combined with perfect awareness of how that authenticity affects others. He wasn't hiding his humanity, he was weaponizing it through complete honesty about his own emotional experience. This reveals a mind that had transcended the normal human contradiction between authenticity and effectiveness, creating a form of leadership that felt entirely natural while being psychologically unprecedented in human history. Imagine watching someone play a master-level chess game while simultaneously having a genuine emotional reaction to every single move. They're not faking their feelings to manipulate the game. They're genuinely excited by a brilliant move, genuinely frustrated by a mistake, genuinely anxious about a difficult position. But somehow, their authentic emotions happen to perfectly align with the most strategically effective responses possible. Every genuine feeling they have makes them play better, not worse. That's exactly what Jesus achieved with human psychology, but on a scale that changed the entire course of human history. He wasn't performing emotions to manipulate people. He was genuinely feeling everything deeply while somehow maintaining perfect awareness of how those genuine feelings would impact others. It's like being simultaneously the most authentic person in the room and the most psychologically aware, without those two things ever conflicting with each other. Most of us have to choose every single day. Be real or be effective. Be vulnerable or be strategic. Be emotional or be intelligent. Be authentic or be influential. Jesus found a way to be all of these things simultaneously, creating a psychological presence that felt entirely human while being strategically perfect. This isn't just emotional intelligence. This is emotional genius that transcends normal human limitations. He demonstrated that the highest form of psychological mastery isn't controlling your emotions or hiding them, but being so authentic and self-aware that your genuine emotional responses naturally align with the most effective possible actions. Think about the implications of this discovery. What if the secret to maximum influence isn't learning to manipulate people or control your feelings, but learning to be so genuinely yourself that your authenticity becomes irresistibly compelling? Jesus proved this was possible, and it changed human history forever. These three psychological mysteries reveal a mind that operated on levels we're still trying to understand. The strategic silence, the power paradox, and the emotional mastery all point to someone who had cracked the code of human influence through complete authenticity. If these revelations exploded your mind, smash that like button and subscribe for more hidden truths. Tell us in the comments which revelation surprised you most. Hit the notification bell so the algorithm doesn't lie to you. Share this with someone who needs to see these truths, because this psychological mastery needs to be understood. Until next time, keep questioning everything you think you know about human potential. This analysis is speculative and based on historical records and psychological principles, not clinical diagnosis. These interpretations represent one perspective on documented historical behaviors.